Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of Season 2 of House, the Shared Living podcast. I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy.
And I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
Let's have a word from our sponsor, My Student Halls.
Housed, the Shared Living podcast, is sponsored by mystudenthalls.com, student accommodation search. Let's find your place.
Thank you so much for supporting us every week and enabling us to bring this podcast to our listeners every week. So, Dan, you've had a big week. You are slightly jet lagged, possibly. Do you want to share a little bit of the key highlights from your trip to India?
Yes, so I've been in India with the team at Verbaflow. They are behind the AI solution that I'm recommending to PBSA, BTR and co-living operators at the moment. It's been founded by Shantan Biswas, who most people in PBSA will know from his time at Uniaco. He has exited Uniaco completely and founded Verbaflow. And I've been involved with that company for about 8 weeks now, something like that. And it started off very simply as a consultancy agreement with a view to creating a go-to-market strategy. And I very quickly realized that this was a complete game changer for the industry. And testament to that is the amount of PBSA operators that we've signed up and demoed. And effectively, it's an omni-channel communications AI whereby it will deal with your students or your residents however and wherever they want to be spoken to, either with voice, with email, with WhatsApp, with web chat, via SMS and via WeChat as well at some point in the near future. It's an incredible tool. I don't want to take up too much time. We've already got a sponsor for this podcast in My Student Halls. But yeah, I have been working with them for a while now, bought into the company in the way that I think really shows that I am happy to put my weight behind it. And, we get a lot of approaches, I'm sure you do too, where people ask us to do minimal, charge minimal consultancy, but maybe get some kind of reward off the back of it in either shares or maybe some kind of revenue split or something along those lines. And I normally run a mile from those kind of things, but this felt very different. So I'm very heavily involved from a strategic advisory point of view with the business. I'm a shareholder. So this isn't independent advice coming to you. I will be pitching at some point, but the company's based in India. So I was invited out there more recently to sort of celebrate the success, have a bit of a strategy time, a strategy away day. And so I spent time in Delhi and also in Rajasthan and just got to meet the team in full. I've spoken to them all over, Teams and whatever, but there's no substitute for actually meeting in person and really, really getting the strategy down so that we can take this to market in full and start looking at, next steps. UK PBSA, BTR, then moving on to US at some point in the future. We've just closed a fundraise, which we'll be talking about at some point soon. But yeah, my love affair with India continues. I absolutely love it. It's shocking and beautiful, and the people are so incredibly friendly. There's still such an amount of culture shock that I get whenever I go there. But yeah, had a great time. So slightly jet lagged now and just prepping for property week a little bit later on this week. So yeah, what have you guys been up to?
I feel like I've been living out of a suitcase for the last few weeks.
Yeah, me too.
I think a lot of people have been trying to fit things in before the end of the year. So Deanie and I have been doing facilitating a lot of sales and marketing training and doing kind of, I guess, advisory and consultancy for various different clients that have got kind of new year ambitious targets to fit in, and so need certain things doing before the end of the year. So it's been really busy, really enjoyable, lots of different cities, meeting lots of different people. And yeah, I guess kind of just doing that last sort of push in 2024 to kind of make sure that all of our clients are set up properly for 2025. Well, one thing that we wanted to talk about today, we have been trying to talk about it for the last couple of weeks, but we've had other things to talk about. But we saw the report from JLL and QX on student housing in 2024. If you haven't read it yet, it's worth a read. Clearly, a lot of research has gone into that. We've picked out a few highlights that we wanted to talk about, but I think the elephant in the room, and we're not going to dwell on it too much because we do talk about it a lot, is the kind of the number one headline was about the structural undersupply of PBSA in the UK, exacerbated by rising demand. And as you all know, if you're regular listeners, we don't believe that's necessarily true. It's about affordability rather than availability. So actually, I don't know that headline does it much favours, because when you read below the headline, there's some really valid and interesting points. Deanie, what did you pull out of the report?
As you say, Sarah, I think there is a kind of attention-grabbing headline, but actually what's in the report is the real issues that is impacting why we are where we are in PBSA. I think the first highlight, which I think is the first time I've probably seen this in reports, is around the participation rates from lower income households have increased significantly, which I think is data that's coming from UCAS. And I know we've spoken about this before, and it is for people from low income households, it's not really a choice of whether you live away at university or not. It's about, can I actually afford it? And I think if we continue to build things that are on the higher end of the spectrum, then those students will just choose not to go to university in terms of studying away from university. They'll go to their local university and they'll commute, because adding on the cost of accommodation on top of already the cost of borrowing the money to go to university just makes it completely unaffordable. So I think that is a data and a trend that we really need to monitor and ensure, I guess, that we are providing a product for those students. That said, the report does go on to talk about the cost of actually being able to build accommodation at under £200 a week, which is the kind of threshold mark where that's where people want to find accommodation priced, but that's very difficult to find and it's very difficult to build. And obviously there's no solutions in this report, and it's great that it's being spoken about, but that is the challenge that we have, is that we've got a very expensive market in which it's difficult to build in, but we've got students that have a threshold of what they can afford.
I think what I think is a possible kind of danger zone that we might be sleepwalking into is the wider participation rates, as this report pulls out, has increased significantly. And we know from talking with UCAS that they've taken away the entry fee from UCAS for lower income families. So there's a lot of great work doing. And I think universities are there generally to provide that first year accommodation for those students. But if the students aren't aware of how much second and third year accommodation is going to be once they move out of university accommodation, that quite often is subsidised for lower income families, they might drop out of university because they won't be able to find anything that is comparable if they move out of university accommodation. So I think that the industry needs to be tracking these numbers really, really carefully, because there could be an instance where the first year take up for wider participation is significantly higher, but how many are potentially going to drop out in the second and third year if they can't find anywhere to live that they can afford that's comparable? Or, as Deanie suggests, if they are a little bit more aware, they will choose to stay at home. And that's great, because they're still getting a university experience, they're still getting a degree. But I think collectively, I'm probably speaking on behalf of Dan and Deanie as well, that, you know, we feel that students from all backgrounds should have the opportunity and to have what all students have available to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I like this report. I do feel, as you said, Sarah, that, you know, obviously the summary is saying there's a massive structural undersupply that is effectively the student housing crisis. And we obviously feel that it is more of an affordability crisis than a supply crisis, as it were. How do you define what affordable actually is? Like, obviously, there's the rising construction costs. They're saying it's impossible to then create develop PBSA that's less than £200 a week for an ensuite, for example. I don't feel that is affordable. I still don't think that £200 is affordable. I think that affordable is pretty much anything under 150 quid a week. And that is what we need to be talking about in these reports. Firstly, how to create that affordable stock, and giving some key action points. I know the guys at Torsion are doing a lot of work on that at the moment. I was talking with Louise about it, Louise Bena at Luna Students, about it. So there's something coming there. Remains to be seen exactly how that will work and what it will look like. But I think we can innovate in that way to have more creative development of PBSA and think about modular construction as well. And there's definite ways to streamline this. But yeah, what is affordable PBSA stock? You could say the same for BTR as well. And I think that £200 just feels like we are pushing that. If we're saying that that's the lowest that we can do right now, that's the lowest that you could technically build for on a per week basis, then how are we going to ensure that all of those participants from those lower income families, that they actually have somewhere to live? Like you said, Sarah, like first year university halls, you can typically find somewhere non-ensuite for, within the 100 to 150 mark. I'm deeming that affordable. That's just what I work off. I'm not sure what you guys think. But yeah, second year, third year, where do they then go when, the rent will then rise quite dramatically if they're looking at going into PBSA, unless we keep building. And I just want to reiterate that whenever Sarah, Deanie, and I are saying, listen, this is an affordability crisis, the solution to that isn't going to be putting in more affordability criteria within, planning regimes or anything like that, or looking at rent caps, or it's about building more beds. We have to build more PBSA and more BTR and more co-living to, effectively alleviate some of the housing crisis and the general housing crisis that we have. But again, I would say that some of that is also probably an affordability crisis too. So we ultimately have to make sure that we are building more, we are enabling more buildings so that the prices do start to regulate themselves. When occupancy drops, the rents tend to drop. We've seen that in loads of locations this year, Nottingham and Leeds being the prime example, but every city has seen various elements of discounting within PBSA in particular. BTR has sort of held its rents as a bit more of a long-term play, I think. So, that's ultimately where we want to get to, where there's more competition in the market. And we do see that is going to be something that continues. So, yeah, this report is good, but I would just say that there needs to be more focus here on affordability rather than overall structural supply.
I think the thing with this report is that it kind of is saying in it that actually students prefer cluster flats with ensuite bathrooms, and they favour smaller cluster flats of 4 to 6 beds. Yet their answer to the solution is actually higher density room types with larger cluster flats. The overall thing is saying that there's a disconnect between what students want and what they can afford. And I think that's the crux of it. And actually higher density flats with large cluster flats is not, they do suggest non-ensuite. And I kind of think there possibly is an answer in that. I think we've been speaking to lots of people across the sector, and there are shared bathroom rooms out there that sell year on year on year on year because they're affordable, because they provide a product for a certain demographic of students that require it and need it. And I think we've got to get our head out of the fact that the only way we're going to achieve this is to make 10-bed flats and put in en-suites, or maybe not put in en-suites, but actually there must be an answer to this. And as you say, Dan, I think we just need to be innovative, and I believe we can be innovative, but we need to tear up the rule book and start again.
It's proven, this type of product, the 6 to 8 bed cluster flats with ensuite rooms, they sell. So why would you change it? But we are at that tipping point now where things do need to be changed. Universities generally have a great choice of accommodation. They have lots of different price points, and they have lots of different room types. And a lot of the success stories that we hear about shared bedrooms and shared bathrooms come from universities. So students are signing up to that in their first year. And our argument based on the research that we've done with students is that as long as you have the shared bathrooms between a small group of people who are inevitably going to be friends by the time they get to their second year, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And I think the larger size flats, if you kind of listen to last week's episode about stress in the sector, you're making it much harder for the operations team to manage 10 students living in a flat together. The mediation needed and the kind of understanding of living with that amount of people is going to be really hard. I'm not sure that there's anybody listening to this podcast that would feel like they would want to live with 10 people, for at least a year. That's really, really hard. So yeah, I'm completely supportive of their suggestion of non-ensuite rooms. And I think we would like to see a place where shared rooms come up. We always say there's a price point for everything. It has to be good quality, but the price point has to be right. And the design has to be right as well. And we're not saying that you should build a 500-bed building of twin rooms. That's never going to work. But just to have a floor or a flat, just something that at least tests the market, because nobody knows what the success is if it doesn't exist. Students can't choose what they can't choose because it doesn't exist. And again, we're talking about accessible rooms last week as well. Well, everyone's like, nobody takes accessible rooms, but you're not marketing them. So nobody knows if accessible rooms are popular. Nobody knows if twin rooms are popular, and nobody knows if shared bathrooms are popular because they don't exist. So hopefully this report shines a light on some of those issues. And like you said, let's tear up the rule book, and we'll stay close to Luna and what Dan, Louise and Stuart are doing, and hope that they can crack the market. And basically the mass demand isn't in high-end studio flats. So if somebody can unlock a way to do this, then they have got the mass market at their feet and they'll do incredibly well.
Tell you what we need. We need a full occupancy study of Sheffield, Coventry, Nottingham, and to be honest, London would be ideal as well, so that we can really see, okay, what are students actually choosing? And then we can see that they want en suites, 10-bed en suites at, £150 per person or whatever. You could probably separate London out from that, but I think we really need to understand what is actually selling, like what's actually working, and what don't we have, and where do we need to build more of this certain room type. If we need more twins and more en suites or more non-en suites, or God, who knows, we may even need more studios in some locations. I highly doubt it, but yeah, I think that's where we just need a bit more work on that.
Student Crowd have that data, so it's they're not going to give it all away for free to the whole sector, but if anybody's looking in particular cities, they do have the data, but they can't provide data for something that doesn't exist. So we've spoken to them, and in a lot of cities there might be 10 non-ensuite rooms. That's not a big enough sample size to say whether it's popular or whether it's not popular. So I still think even with all the data in the world, you can't have what you can't see.
Yeah, I've got to catch up with Paul and Thule later this week to really go through their data product, because I know it's evolving, as is Stu Rents, and there's a couple of other, Price Hubble as well as a new player that we've seen. We have to be analysing this, and everybody has to start using it as much as possible. I know that we've talked about marking our own homework, with agents typically doing a lot of the feasibility studies, and shock horror, the result is quite often, yes, you should build this, and yeah, you can build studios and they'll sell, no problem at all. But I think that's where I really want to understand that occupancy data, the price points, the saturation point in that market. There's work there to be done. I might commission a report on that, but yeah, let's see how we go after my call with Student Crowd later this week.
Brilliant. Another highlight of the week for us actually is Deanie and I were asked to attend and present at a PBSA operators managers meeting, and they had a range of speakers, and I think I can probably talk on behalf of everybody that was there that Derek Asazi from the Black Sport Collective at Nottingham University was certainly a highlight. He's been doing a lot of work with the Living Black at University project as well, so I think he's well known kind of on the speaking circuit, but Deanie and I hadn't yet had an opportunity to see him or any of the Living Black at University events. And basically the Black Sport Collective helps bring together Black students at the university who are interested in sport and fitness at all levels, and provides a support system to inspire and motivate students to excel. Now, he went through all the reasons why it was needed and what it means to students, and he really just called out so many things that I think a lot of people are scared to talk about. I asked him afterwards, do you think students should be given the option of who they want to live with from a cultural standpoint? And he categorically said yes. And I explained we have had this conversation with universities, and they believe that students should be exposed to people from all backgrounds, and they need to learn resilience and tolerance and acceptance. And his argument was absolutely, and there's lots of environments within the university that you can do that, but why would you force people to live with people that they don't want to? That's an unnatural lack of choice. We have choice in lots of areas, but who we want to live with in student accommodation is often not considered. He was giving stories of kind of particular discrimination and low-level racial abuse, really, on things like what he might choose to eat. He's British, but he comes from a Nigerian background. And, he was saying that, in a shared flat, people make comments about your food or the smell of the food, or, why would you want to eat that? And that's disgusting. And he said, and then what you find is people moderate their behaviour. and they squash their culture really to fit in with everyone else. And that's not an environment that we should be supportive of. And I said to him, well, are you saying that there should be Muslim flats? And he was like, why not? If Muslim students could live together and all share Ramadan together and, have prayer time together, then why is that such a bad thing? I mean, I think it's from standing from the other side, I think it's very difficult. And how segmented do you go, and how dangerous is it to I guess encourage particular people to live together? But there should be choice of who you live with, I think, at the end of the day. Sorry, Dan.
The two examples that I can use for this is I was an English language assistant in France in my third year at university. That was my opportunity to really fully integrate into French culture. And what did I do? I hung around with fellow English language assistants on the weekends and in the evenings, because that was just what I wanted to do. Now, don't get me wrong, I got plenty of exposure to France. I was playing football in a French team and whatnot. But then at Nido, we had a lot of Indian students, actually. We had a really high cohort of Indian students at Nido West Hampstead in particular. And we very quickly realised through complaints, but also just through general cultural preferences, that Indian students wanted to live together. They weren't that fussed at that time, back in 2017 or 18, about integrating into that specific building. They were quite happy saying, right, we've got these 9-bed ensuite apartments. We will almost take that over and that will become ours. In the end, complied with that, because my initial thought was, well, surely everyone should just be integrated and we should build this big happy community. But actually you then find that you end up with those sub-communities, the typical sort of social groups that will gravitate towards each other. And I think there is just that, I suppose, that real sense of cultural identity that comes with being a Nigerian student, an Indian student, Chinese students, etc., that they do gravitate towards each other. And so we facilitated that. Obviously, the complaints then went down. And these complaints were primarily around social hours and waking hours, and around cooking. And yes, the smells from Indian cooking are particularly strong. I know that, obviously, having just got back from there. And when you're living with maybe 5 Indian students in an ensuite cluster flat, and there's another 5 students from elsewhere, typically those 5 Indian students will gravitate towards each other. They will start to synchronize cooking, etc., because it's a real community thing, and fair enough. But I think that we're in danger a little bit of creating certain ghettos in that way. So you have to be a bit careful about how you manage it. I think it's down to student choice. I don't think that universities saying you have to come here and mix. I think that should ultimately be down to student choice. But then roommate matching is still quite far behind. I know that Roomy are doing their best to try and change that, and some of the PMS systems are too. But yeah, I think there's still a way to go on that.
I think that's just what I was going to say, is we are in the age of technology, and we should be able to have a system that can help with that choice. And that it's never going to be perfect and it's never going to be right, but it gives that ownership of, I'm going to choose where I live and how I live and who I live with. And I think the technology must be there. It's just we haven't quite got it right.
Yeah, we're moving into an era of personalisation. Let's be really clear about this. Everyone is going to expect personal service at whatever end of the spectrum they are in terms of affordability. So if we can offer that to them by saying, we've got this roommate matching software, you feel free to put in your preferences and we'll do our best to try and match that, then I think fair enough. You've got to give them that element of choice, in my opinion. It's the difficulty that you then have is that there may be some operational issues off the back of that, in terms of potential people that should not ultimately be together ending up being together, undergrads alongside postgrads, etc. But you can set those parameters in place. So it's a really interesting one to think about, that's for sure.
I think there are now, thankfully, these working groups and guidance that we should all be leveraging. They've done such a lot of work into this Living Black at University project. And, one of the most simple things is creating a guide for students at your university or in your city or, near to your PBSA, of where people can find certain things that they find comforting and feel like they're part of their culture. And that might be places of worship or hairdressers or places to get food or social and cultural groups. But the guidance is there, and I think a lot of the time people are scared to offend people or segment people. And Derek said, if you're worried about offending someone, ask, if I do this, will this offend you? And you'll get the answer. He said doing nothing is worse than doing something. And he kind of used the analogy of just little things, just little ripples. He's not expecting massive waves, but if everybody does something that creates a little tiny ripple, then, it's just the best thing for the students.
I totally agree. I think there's an element of transparency that needs to happen here in communication. I do think that a lot of people are scared about talking about race and about gender in particular. And I think we just need to be really transparent and open about it. And yeah, there is a bit of a fear of offence, of course, but I think, as you said, that's a really good approach, Sarah. So yeah, I think that's really great that Derek is able to articulate that quite so well.
I think that's the point. I think knowledge is power, and I think hearing Derek speak it gives you that understanding of the challenges that are faced by lots of people, and the more that you learn and you understand that and you have empathy towards that and can be aware, then you're going to be able to help. And I think that's I lived in where Derek was lived, and I can't live his experience, but I can learn a lot from listening to him. And I think that, as Sarah says, is all there. There's lots of reports, there's lots of research, there's lots of understanding. If we arm ourselves with that knowledge, then we can all make changes which will hopefully send things in the right direction.
The last thing we wanted to cover today was the Co-living in London Greater Living Authority guidance. Lichfield's created a report about how co-living can support the wider GLA policy, and we just spent a little bit of time going through that report. BTR News published it, so you can access it if you want. And we just found some of the metrics being used for co-living quite interesting. So it states that the minimum unit size should be 18 square metres and the maximum should be 27 square metres, excluding accessible units, which automatically would indicate that co-living is being considered to be studio apartments. As we've discussed before, we would like to see co-living as shared flats, like it is in mainland Europe, but for some reason in London, co-living is being considered as studio flats. And then there's a lot of guidance around the provision of external communal space and internal communal space. But considering this is specifically about London, the one thing that shocked us was that there should be 2 square metres of external amenity space per unit. Now, considering we have let's be clear, we do have a housing shortage in London overall, specifying so much outdoor space seems very, very short-sighted. I think, our view is always what is in the local area, because in a lot of London, there is a huge access to outdoor space. There's lots of public realm anyway. Do you need outdoor space that's attached to your property? And the same with social space as well. Yes, if you're living in a studio flat, you do need to be able to leave your flat and access communal space elsewhere. But surely that should also be a little bit pragmatic in the local area. I think it would be a waste of space personally if it was a co-living development to have gyms and co-working space and cinema rooms, because you've got all of that on your doorstep in London. However, if you were building a co-living maybe in a suburban or urban place, then that's probably a good idea. But in central London, no, I just don't buy it. What do you guys think?
It just can't work. You can't provide 2 meters squared of outdoor space unless you're building such small units in terms of the overall unit size. I just don't understand how that would work. Even at 1 meter squared, I just don't see that would work. We have to build high rises to a certain extent in co-living, especially in London. So that outside space, it just doesn't stack up. A bit concerned by that. I'd like to understand it a bit more. There's the diagram obviously that they've produced. I don't know if that's Lichfields that's produced that. So that's the company behind this consultancy. They're a planning and development consultancy ultimately. But yeah, saying 2 meters squared of external spaces, and I just see that seems a bit mad. 5.5 meters squared per person of communal amenities. So but that is per unit. So that looks like it's.
But if it's a studio flat, that will be a unit, which will be per person.
This feels like it's almost a one size fits all approach. And actually what we need is a really sensible approach to this. So I'm not sure quite how well this will go down with the co-living sector. I'd love to hear from anyone that is looking at developing in London, a co-living scheme of any size almost. But I think that this is going to constrain quite a lot of developments, because the last thing we want is obviously to build the wrong product, but we have to get a product that actually works to get it off the ground in the first place. I think given the building safety regulations and the fire safety, etc., this is going to put so many more barriers into building co-living that, the affordability play as well. It's just becoming prohibitive. Co-living will effectively die before it's even been born. It's such a nascent sector, and we've got to nurture it rather than put in, so many controls in place. So I'd like to hear from anyone in co-living. I think we all would, to really understand how they feel this is going to impact them if they're looking at London in particular.
I mean, there is a risk that we're just going to build a bunch of studios for co-living and some massive social spaces. And I'm not sure that's what the housing market demands or needs or requires. And like you say, I think it's great to have a framework, but that has to be a flexible framework that can adapt to what that local community needs.
I grew up in London and lived in London throughout my 20s. So I kind of lived in my family home, and then I lived with my ex-husband. So I didn't have that kind of shared living lifestyle. But everyone I worked with in London, and everybody who worked for me in London, kind of came to London for work and then found a shared house. I didn't hear any of those people wanting to live alone. It was part of, I guess, the independence and the maturity of living in London. And it can be quite a scary place if you don't come from London. And actually they all gravitated towards living with other people. So yeah, I'm not sure, like you said, Dan, that building loads of studio flats really is the answer here. And there's an opportunity to create an affordable product. But will loads of studios be affordable? It says also that out of 36 applications, I think 24 had been approved. And we know that there aren't 24 co-living schemes yet built, so we haven't actually seen them all yet anyway. And I do wonder about the ones that weren't approved, whether it was because they didn't quite meet this criteria, which we're challenging. The other one that we thought was quite funny is basically one bike space per unit as well. And, when you're in central London and you've got, not even central London, greater London, you've got tubes and trains and trams and buses and shared line bikes on your doorstep. Why would you waste space in a building providing a bike store? If you've got a 400 bed building, that's 400 bike spaces that you need in that building. I don't know what
you genuinely don't.
I don't know what the maths is, but how much is that going to take up? And actually you could have some more flats there, make it more affordable. So, I hope there are some challenges to these policies. Like I said, we still haven't seen enough really to, and again, bit to the conversation that we had before, it's not, no one's trying anything different. So, once the studio space in co-living becomes established and people are investing in it, will there be more confidence to try different product types? Let's hope so. And just finally, a shameless plug, the Property Marketing Strategist Youth Forum report number 11 in partnership with Student Crowd is out this week. So by the time we go live with this, hopefully you will have all received it and all be digesting it. We asked loads of students about how did they understand about student accommodation and do they understand what they're being sold? I'm not going to spoil it with the answers, but we talk about how the rooms are advertised, the terminology that we use, how they reference rooms, and about the lack of consistency in room type terminology that's confusing the sector, and what features in their room students would be expected to pay more. So if you don't have access to our social media or you're not on our database and you would like to receive a copy of the latest Youth Forum report on what students really understand about PBSA selling them, then please make sure that you're following our socials, you visit our website or get in touch and we will make sure that you receive a copy. On that subject, we actually don't have a sponsor for the Youth Forum. We have our wonderful partner Student Crowd, which enables the surveys to get out to a large audience. But we would really, really love for one of our lovely listeners to be able to get all of the engagement and all of the exposure from being a sponsor of the Youth Forum. So if you would like to see your logo on all of our comms and to be part of it, we want somebody that will contribute to the topics and really, really engage with the outcomes and the insight. So do get in touch if you would like to sponsor our Youth Forum. Right, that's all. We will be, hopefully by Friday when this comes out, we will have seen a whole whole load of you at Property Week, and good luck to anybody that is in the awards. And we will do a summary of Property Week the following week, so hopefully we'll come away with loads of interesting and innovative insight. And that's all for us today. Thank you again so much to My Student Halls for sponsoring us, and have a great week, everyone.